Welcome to Who Built Wigan's Churches. As Paul says, we are Pat and Will Sharp's sister and brother, brought up in Wigan on Watford Avenue East in Mains Road. We went to St Michael's School Primary School. I went to the high school and Will went to the deanery. We attended St Michael's Church and were brownies and cubs. We both now live in East London and have become very interested in Wigan churches in their history. It needs to be recorded and celebrated, much like the more famous churches of the City of London and Oxford. Our aim is to write an overall history of the churches in the Wigan deanery. A year ago, as Paul said, we came up to Wigan. Remember those really, really hot summer days? That was when we were here to make a start, without much idea of what the task involved, how much it would take over our lives, the interesting places it would take us to, and the lovely people we would meet. And now we have something to share. This is a work in progress, and this talk covers some of what we've found out so far. So off we go, and let's start with the deanery high school.
The deanery badge. As Pat said, I went to the high school, and on the first day, the deanery high school, and on the first day, John Sharp was the head, spoke to all us new kids in H1 the main hall. He explained the badge. There are 30 dots around the badge, he told us, and they represent the 30 parishes of the Wigan deanery. That fact has stayed with me, and 50 years on, here I am talking about those very churches. What are we talking about this evening? For now, we are researching Church of England churches and ones in the Wigan deanery. This map shows the Wigan deanery. Who are we going to meet? We are going to meet bishops. Their role is hard to work out. Until 1880, it was the bishops of Chester who came to Wigan. After that, it was the bishops of Liverpool. Bishop Chavas was a bishop in the early 20th century, and he seems to crop up absolutely everywhere. The bishops were always there in the background, encouraging the building of new churches. Rectors lived in the big house at the bottom of Hallgate and oversaw the whole deanery. Listed out for rector Bridgman, again, very important. Vicars looked after their own parishes. Vicar of St Andrews, Vicar of St Nathaniel's. Curates, usually young, starting out as vicars, who would often be sent out to start churches in different parts of the town. Difficult job, deserve more recognition. Architects. A whole range of architects designed Wigan churches. Famous names like G Street, as well as Wigan architects like Heaton and Ralph. Builders and craftspeople. Sadly, we don't have many names. Some churches were built by winners. Some wood carving was done by the delightfully named Advent Hunstone. They deserve much more recognition. Their names are simply not recorded. Aristocracy. The Crawford family at Hayhall are important in the story, as you would expect. Another key people are from aristocratic families. Colliery owners own coal pits. Colonel Blundell in Pemberton. Knowles and Pearson in Ince. They too gave money to build churches, sometimes paying for the whole church in memory of close family members. Cotton mill owners. People like the Eckersleys, who owned the mills in Poole Stock. The Penningtons in Hingley. Money for churches came from them too. Solicitors and bankers. The banking family, the Woodcocks, and the solicitors, the Ellises, they often paid for things in churches. Ordinary people. The ordinary people who raised money for their new churches in many different, often to us now, completely incomprehensible ways. The people who cleaned and cared for their church. The people, some of whom are here tonight, who still do. Ordinary people seem to have had, as has seen part two, the time of their lives at church events. Historians. It's wonderful because they have done the job for us. Over the years, people have written the history of their own churches. Some of these books date back as far as the 1940s. Sometimes they are properly bound illustrated books. Other times they are long-lost handwritten accounts found hidden away in church safes. Without them, our task would be impossible. I'm now going to attempt the impossible. Hold on tight, stay awake. Here starts possibly the first and definitely the quickest gallop ever through Wigan's churches. The early churches, the parish church, of ancient origin, possibly mentioned in the Domesday Book in 1086, definitely in existence in 1199. rebuilt in the 1840s. Ashton, a chapel mentioned there in about 1515, predecessor St Thomas's, the church in the middle of Ashton now. Village, there was a chapel there in 1539, and the present St Aidan's chapel dates from 1718. Hindley All Saints, a lovely little church, first mentioned in the Civil War, present church 1767. St George's, 1781. Now into Wigan's boom time, the 1830s. St David's Hay, St John's Pemberton, a church we've discovered that is so beautiful, Holy Trinity Downall Green in Ashton. Fairly small plain churches, nothing fancy. Listening to sermons was probably the most important thing that happened there in the early days. Go to see those churchyards. Hay and Pemberton, paid for by the church commissioners, in effect a government department. Downall Green, paid for by the rector of Winwick. 1840s, St Catherine's, that's that spire which is such a Wigan landmark. It still has many of its original furnishings inside. The parish church was rebuilt, with just a few older bits remaining. 1950s, a forgotten church, St Thomas's in Caroline Street, demolished in the 1970s, and you still meet people who remember it fondly. The 1860s, the big stone-built churches. Churches now had choirs and services were much more ornate. These were the fancy, ornate churches we're all used to. St James's Pool Stop, paid for by Nathaniel Eckersley, the mill owner. St Peter's Hindley, paid for largely by the penitents of Hindley. Christchurch Inns, paid for by the Giglow sisters. See the Society's website. The 1870s, St Michael's. Its architect, a national figure, George Edmund Street. Why did he design a church in Wigan? We think we know. And here we see that rector Wigan mentioned earlier, George Bridgman, begin to make an impact on churches built in the town. St Elizabeth's Aspel. Very different type and very different architects. Two brothers from Manchester, the Taylors. Amazing brickwork inside. Lovely windows, partly paid for by the Crawfords. The 1880s, St Andrew's Springfield. Famous for its wood carving. Remember that name? Advent Hunston. Another church which Rector Bridgman hoped to get built. St Mary's Inns. Another lost church. Very impressive. Paid for by Knowles and Pearson. Big names in 19th century Wigan. The 1890s, a busy decade. Wigan was growing. St Matthew's Highfield, very beautiful. Red sandstone, paid for by one man, Colonel Blundell, owner of Pemberton Colliery. Paley and Austin were the architects. St Mark's Newtown, Wigan architects getting on the act. Heaton and Ralph, who also designed Makinson's Arcade, the lovely buildings on the corner of Market Place and Market Street, and the Raven and the Victoria pubs in Walgate. St John's New Springs, red brick. Those interesting Taylor brothers from Manchester were the architects again. Much of the money to build it came from people associated with Wigan Coal and Iron across the canal at Top Lock. St John's Hindley Green. John Carlton Eckersley, son of Nathaniel at Bullstock, gave a considerable sum of money towards its construction. More wood carving by Advent Hunston. Some lovely windows. St Thomas's Ashton, which replaced the earlier chapel. William Wynnard was the builder, and Francis Smith, Joiners of Pemberton, carved the woodwork. Lady Gerard of Garswood Hall laid the foundation stone. 1900s, what are we keeping up? 1900s, another church which John Carlton Eckersley contributed to. Much of the money, though, to build the church was given by the people themselves. Fundraising, a topic we'll come back to. St James's Bickershaw, built as the Johnson Memorial Church in memory of James Johnson, pit owner. Opened by the saintly little bishop, Francis Chavas of Liverpool, whose role in getting these churches built was clearly great, but it's hard to identify. 1910s. St Paul's Goose Green, principal benefactor was again John Carlton Eckersley, also designed by Wigan's Heaton and Ralph. Much of the groundwork before the church was actually built was done by Reverend William Walker, who worked in the Goose Green area for 35 years and was blind, unable to see any of his parishioners. Between the walls, St John's Abram and St Luke's Oral, both to replace earlier churches. St Stephen's Welly, fascinating history. Those young curates were very busy here. Lord Crawford offered to supply the trees in the church grounds from the Hay Estate. These churches are quite traditional, but they have some up-to-date features. One was built with a car park and is spacious and light. The 1950s, modern and very different. St Anne's Beech Hill. Beech Hill is where I encouraged to buy a brick to pay for the church, but more money was obtained from an unexpected source. Light, airy, wonderful 1950s decoration and design inside. The more we know. Ashton Wands, St Andrew's Garswood, St Luke's Stubshire Cross, and the demolished St Peter's Brim. St Philip's Healy is mentioned, and there's the Good Shepherd in Bamplong. St Francis Kit Green and St Barnabas Marsh Green are mission churches and are very important to the story. But just for now, I think you'll agree we've got enough to be going on with. So, what we've done is to select 6 churches to tell you about. I want to emphasise we really could have chosen any Wigan churches. Each church has its own special story linked to the wider history of Wigan and shows the commitment, both in the past and still today, of people to their much-loved churches. We've chosen mainly churches we know and are familiar with. They're not necessarily the best and may not even be our favourites. We simply have to start somewhere. And in Wigan, you have to begin with the parish church, but rather than the building itself, it's the Bridgman rectors, the first one of whom came to Wigan in 1616, which concern us today. We can identify 5 members of the family who became rectors of Wigan.
Here he is, George Thomas Orlando Bridgman, rector of Wigan, 1864 to 1895. We're abbreviating him to GTOB. GTOB was an aristocrat, born in 1823, the second son of the Earl of Bradford at Weston Park, the family home in Shropshire. Look it up, it's still very grand. A G8 summit was held there in 1998. GTOB was educated at Harrow School and Cambridge University, but he's a second son, so as is the way, goes into the church. GTOB married Mary Bagot in 1850 at St Peter's Church in Eaton Square, London. Very posh. And they had 3 children in under 3 years. Mary died a short time after the birth of their 3rd child in 1852, leaving George a widower, aged 29. George arrived at the recently built and prestigious parish church in 1864. We have an account of him becoming the rector. The keys were handed to him by the senior incumbent of the parish, the Reverend Howard St George of Billings, and the rector, entering, locked the front door after him and walked through the church, leaving by the vestry door, which he also locked, and went up the tower and rang each of the bells. GTO had announced his own arrival. He was from a big aristocratic family, so he needed somewhere impressive to accommodate their visits. He commissioned George Eastreet, a famous architect at the time, to design and build a hall in Frog Lane. This is an excerpt from the history of the church and manor of Wigan. When Mr. Bridgman succeeded as rector of Wigan, the old hall or rectory house was found to be much shaken and dilapidated by the working of the coal under the glebe, but it was pronounced beyond efficient repair and was therefore condemned to be pulled down. In 1871, GTOB got a private act of Parliament passed. Surely only a supremely self-confident aristocrat would manage that, by which he obtained power to borrow money on the security of the mine rents to rebuild the house and to grant building leases on long terms of 999 years. And there are people in this room tonight living on glebe land who still pay the appropriate fees. A new hall, after the design of Mr. George Edmund Street, was completed in 1875 at an expense considerably exceeding the sum allowed by the Court of Chancery, of which the extra portion was paid by the rector himself. So George did use some of his money to finance his large home. Stand at the bus stop and look at the hall. It is completely over the top and out of place for the situation. George needed a lot of staff to ensure the place ran smoothly, and one of them is remembered in a plaque in the church hall. Sorry, in the parish church, not the church hall. Lucy was born in Muggington, Lucy Beeston. She was born in Muggington in Derbyshire. In 1861, she lived with GTOB and his family in the rectory in Blimhall in Staffordshire, where he was rector before coming to Wigan. In 1871 and 81, she was living and working at the hall. She is described as a domestic servant housekeeper. We can imagine she was much more than that, coping with the move from Blimhall to Wigan, as well as the effects of a loss of GTOB's wife in 1852. She's the one servant remembered in the hall. And this is her burial entry dated 21st of July 1883 from the parish church records. The curate, the Reverend Buckmaster, officiated at her funeral. The words churchyard on the left-hand side are unique to Lucy on that page. Was being buried in the churchyard a privilege? What were the other options? There were very few graves visible in the churchyard now. From what we can gather, the graves were grassed over in about 1910. A census. We all love a census. 1881 census. This is the original record, and there's a long list of names at the hall. I'm going to decipher that for you. 1881 census. In residence that evening, the 3rd of April. There were 18 people listed at the hall on the night of the census in 1881. 7 of them were the upstairs folk, GTOB and 6 visitors. 11 were the downstairs contingent. 7 were on the staff of the hall, 4 accompanied the visitors. In total, 7 women and 4 men. The hall servants were born either in Shropshire or Staffordshire, close to Weston Park. So we assume they came with GTOB to Wigan, or maybe there was a constant toing and froing of domestic help between the 2 houses, Lucy being the exception. The visiting servants came from further south, Essex and Kent, Middlesex, and just 1 from Shropshire. Upstairs, GTOB is at the hall with his sister and a female cousin and their families. First up is his sister, Mary S.L. Clive, aged 51, described as an earl's daughter and a widow. This is Mary Selina Louise Clive. Henrietta, Mary's daughter, is with her. Also visiting was GTB's cousin Selina and her husband Henry Fox Bristow, both aged 56. He is listed as the Vice-Chancellor of the County Palestine of Lancaster. Selina married Henry in 1852 in St. Peter's, Eaton Square, a family favourite. GTOB married them. Accompanying them are their daughters, Alice and Georgina, aged 25 and 23. And as we've seen, the visitors bring their servants with them. Is it a coincidence that they are all at the hall together on that April day? Someone's birthday, an anniversary, a spring get-together? I'm sorry to say, we don't know. Group photo. Some of the people we are talking about must be in this photo, but there are no details about it. We think this is Edwardian rather than Victorian, so dates matter GTOB's time as rector. But what is it marking? It's taken on land where the deanery school is today, with the hall in the background. Is the mayor Samuel Wood, 1907 to 1911? We think the man in the middle is likely to be the rector of Wigan, after GTOB, Reverend Roman George Matthew, who had previously been a vicar at St Michael's.
Newmarket Street. Newmarket Street seems from the census, indeed from memories of people today, to have been an annex to the hall, part of the rector's headquarters. 4 vicars and curates were living there in 1881, and also several nuns called the Sisters of Mercy, who people still remember in Wigan today. We think GTOB brought them to Wigan, and at least until the 1950s, they still worked in the town, especially at St Anne's Beach Hill. GTOB we suggest to join curates out from Newmarket Street into Wigan to start churches onto his own patch, the rector's domain, the mains, starting with a church in Springfield, which later became St Andrews and then St Michael's. So St Andrews. St Andrews became a separate parish in 1870, but there was no church, the present one being built some 12 years later. It must have been a daunting job to start a new church, especially when there was no building. Enter Reverend Arthur Legg, a fascinating man, posh, grandson of the Earl of Dartmouth of an esteemed Shropshire family, we are told. Educated at Eton and Oxford, he trained to be a lawyer in the Temple in London. Members of his families were bishops, MPs and army generals, but our Arthur Legg became a vicar, came to Wigan as one of Bridgman's curates and got stuck in straight away. The first services in Springfield were held in two schools, Mrs. Thickness's in Beech Hill and another one in Marsh Green. Legg wanted to make the buildings more suitable for worship and were told he personally painted and gilded the front of the altar. In 1872, Markham Mills School was opened, largely paid for by Wigan's MP Sir Francis Sharp Howell, whose shoe we all rub in the park. And on the 11th of February 1872, the first religious service was held in the new school. And as I say, Reverend Legg got to work. Leads to an account in The Observer in 1877 about the Congregational Tea Party which took place there, which shows us most about his involvement in the area. It says, "I do hope to see signs of our being better looked after by the town authorities. I hope we should not be left in total darkness as we used to be from time to time." And he goes on to outline some burning issues. "We should soon have a wall letterbox in Woodhouse Lane so that we will be able to post our letters without going into Wigan. I look forward to the time when Woodhouse Lane will no longer have its gutter in the middle of the road, but at the sides, and when the windows will no longer be broken with impunity in Canal Street. I hope that the heightening of Markham Bridge is only the first step towards raising the road on the Pemberton side, so that the Marsh Green people might attend our services without having to wade up to their ankles or knees in wet weather." And here is Marsh Green in yellow. The church is here in red, and when you think about it, to get from Marsh Green to a church in Springfield, you'd have to cross the Douglas and the canal. If there wasn't a proper bridge, it could be quite tricky, an excuse perhaps not to go to church. Legg is also very concerned about the amount of beer drunk in the parish. He says he's not a teetotaler, but if he could get nothing but the beer that is sold at the public houses in Wigan, he will clearly become one. Wigan ale was not for him. Legg had worked hard starting the parish shop with services in the schools, which he decorated himself. He got the scheme for permanent church underway, obtained sites and funding. So why did he resign? Move on in 1878 before the church was actually built? We don't know. He went on to become a curate in Shropshire, in a village which had a very small rural population, quite a contrast. And of course, one of the striking things about St Andrews is that it's still surrounded by the houses which were built soon after the church was completed. Other churches, St Catherine's and St Nathaniel's, for example, still have a row of Victorian houses nearby, but the other houses have been demolished and sometimes replaced. The houses by the church in Springfield are sturdy and still fit for purpose. Our mum was born in Moss Street in 1927. The buildings in the area haven't changed much since then. Even today, Mum would know exactly where she was. You get a real sense of the parish the church was built to serve and continues to do to this day.
St Andrews was designed by F.W. Hunt, architects of London. They'd just built a church in Derby, and were told the next vicar, Reverend Wickham, visited it and said he wanted the same in Wigan, and the similarities between the two were striking. William Wickham was the vicar who got the new church built. He needs a talk all to himself. There is so much to say about him. Unlike Legg, and indeed Bridgman, he went to an ordinary school and did not go to university. One of the first things he did when he got to Wigan was to go down the pit to experience firsthand what many of his parishioners did for a living. He was responsible for St Andrew's School and built a church house, which included a gym, advanced at the time. But the thing he's most famous for is his photographs, taken in the early 1890s. He was one of the first people in the country to take pictures underground. You can see that. And we get an image of the ordinary people who lived in the parish. He put on lantern shows, and we're told Wiganers had a good laugh when they saw themselves on the screen for the first time. He set up soup kitchens for local people during the 1893 coal strike. He is the person who set about making the inside of the church so beautiful.
St Andrew's Church is indeed full of stuff, probably better referred to as church furnishings, for example, wood carving. Much of this was done by Mr. Advent Hunstone, known as Old Advent. If you look at the base of the lectern, beneath the eagle on the top part of the base, the name Advent Hunstone can be seen carved into the woods in very small letters. Reverend Wigan, we are told, designed most of the carvings in cooperation with Mr. Hunstone. At St Andrew's, Hunstone carved the choir stalls. At one end, on the left, is this lovely carving of St Cecilia, patron church and music playing the organ. But look what's on the back to its right. An organist of more recent times have left their coat and cap on a peg. The choir stalls were presented by the congregation in memory of a respected parishioner, Elias Headley, who lost his life aged 50 in an accident at Douglas Bank Colliery in 1892. You can find a report of the accident in the Observer. Relatives of Elias still attend the church today and sit in the very choir stalls given in his memory. Advent Hunstone's carvings are to be found in other churches in Wigan. So far, I've seen his work in St John's in the Green and the parish church. Keep your eyes peeled for more and let me know.
The church's war memorial was dedicated in 1921 and lists 86 names, including one woman, Jane Johnstone. By definition, a name on a war memorial is going to be sad, and Jane's story is particularly so. Jane Foster was born in 1879 at Laken near Ormskirk. She was the youngest of 11 children. In 1897, Jane married Robert Johnston in Liverpool. Robert, a sailor, had previously been married to Mabel Powell and had 3 children. Mabel filed for divorce in 1887, and here's why. From the last mentioned time, your petitioner, Mabel, was, without provocation, subject to violent assault and beatings. And on the 11th of March, when your petitioner was in bed with her children, the respondent, Robert, struck your petitioner twice on the face and threatened to kill her before the day was over. And about an hour after that, last beating, he took her by the throat and knocked her head violently against the wall, threatening that he would kill her. So Jane had married an unpleasant character, to say the least. Why did she marry him, given his track record? So Jane got a job on a merchant navy boat, ferrying supplies across the Atlantic. She died on the SS Missionary, a Canadian Pacific ship, on the 9th of September 1918, en route from Liverpool to New York. The ship was torpedoed by a German submarine and 45 lives were lost. I found this on a diving and wreck locating website. Dive report, 2nd of September 2022 by Dark Star divers operating from Newlyn in Cornwall. The wreck lies on its starboard side at 97 metres, identified by Bell and Crockery, marked as Canadian Pacific. According to surviving relatives, Jane's family did not like her working at sea, and this fatal voyage was due to have been her last. So how come she's on this war memorial? Jane is listed in 1911 as living in Throttlenest Avenue, near St Andrews, with her sister. We assume her family wanted to remember her at their local church, but she does look a bit like an afterthought. Not a desperately good photograph, but this is her here. She's also commemorated at Tower Hill Seamen's Memorial in London, and the cenotaph at the parish church. I spent a very wet half hour last week looking for her name at Tower Hill. It's right at the top of the monument. That's the one that's over there. Leave the name in there. It's right at the top of the monument. Difficult to see, easily missed.
So St Michael's, the building of St Michael's like St Andrews is also surely down to Rector Bridgman. He sent cures to minister to the Swindley district of people like the Woodcocks, the Wigan banking family, the Kenyans and the Ellis family helped to pay for the new church. St Michael's is a fine building. It was designed by G Street, a famous London and Oxford architect. So how comes Street built a church here? The answer has to be, we think, because of the Bridgman link. In this type of history, sometimes we can only speculate because hard evidence just doesn't exist. But Street had done work restoring the Bridgman family house in Weston near their country house. GTOB got Street to design the hall, so Street was on hand to provide plans for St Michael's. And there it is, set back in its lovely garden, stone built and grand. But there's always a bit more to it when you dig deeper. Looking at St Michael's today, you would assume it was all built and paid for in one go by GTOB, the Woodcocks, and most likely the well-off residents of the new houses built on Swindley Road. Not so. The south side that faced the poorer Duke Street was completed some 5 or 6 years after the rest of the building. There must have been a temporary wall down the side where you now go in. The archives gives the details of how money was raised to complete the church, and we think that this is hilarious. There's an old cutting from, we assume, the Wigan Observer saying there had been a sale of work one Tuesday afternoon in the schoolrooms where, about 90 years later as 5-year-olds, we started our school lives. That sale of work was specifically held to raise money to complete the church. Fundraising, as I say, becomes a familiar theme. Slight spoiler alert, we won't use the same tone of voice today, but times then were very different. The report reads, the Honourable Mrs. E. Kenyon opened the sale. Since the building was consecrated in 1878, the congregations have considerably increased in numbers, so much so that at times there is some difficulty in comfortably seating them all. And this fact, in addition to a desire to see remedied the lack of symmetry in the building, has led to a movement for the erection of the parts named. To augment this sum, it was decided to hold a sale of work, and the ladies of the congregation, forgive me, especially the working class portion of it, worked with commendable zeal and gathered a fine collection of goods exhibited for sale on Tuesday. The report goes on to describe the stalls in detail, but this is our favourite bit. Perhaps the principal attraction was the exhibition, which, it may be remarked, was not the customary bogus show, but a real exhibition of interesting things. The items are listed together with the names of the people who lent them. Among the most notable of the exhibits were a spear and bow from Nubian Africa and a Nubian crocodile skin shield. This is in Swindley. Alongside such exoticism, there was a model of the parish church, a model of Hay Hall, Japanese curios, fossils, a case of miniature ironmongery, representation of the Lord's Supper exquisitely carved in ivory by the natives of Bramagau in Austria, and some old Wigan pottery. And so the list goes on, all displayed presumably in that long main hall in the old school where we went to assembly and did PE. What on earth was going on, we wonder? Did you pay to see the exhibits? Why did people lend them? How on earth did this event make money? And it's interesting to see how involved one family, the Ellises, were in the event. Master Ellis, for example, lent the eggs for the exhibition. Mr. Ellis, the church warden, sent the Lord's Supper carving. 3 Miss Ellises helped to run the stalls. Miss Dolly Ellis was one of the 2 little girls who presented Mrs. Kenyon with a bouquet of flowers. The involvement of individual families, in this case the solicitor family, the Ellises, office in King Street, is clear here and of interest.
St Michael's has got beautiful stained glass windows designed as a group to show Old Testament characters. They were put in the 1890s. They were all designed by Hardman, a famous stained glass manufacturer in Birmingham. Most of them were given in memory of someone, and we assume the families of the people who remembered in them paid for their own window. But how did this work? Did the vicar announce publicly that he wanted to put in the windows and ask for people to give money towards them? Or did, as possibly the case here, just approach wealthy individual families privately and discreetly? It's interesting to speculate. One of the windows was given in memory of Helen Mary Appleton. We struck lucky with Helen, as one of her relatives had researched the family on ancestry, so we were able to make contact with Richard. Helen was born on the 14th of October, 1876 in Wigan, and baptised at the parish church. She died, aged only 19, on the 3rd of February, 1896. She was the daughter of Charles and Mary Appleton, the family of Wigan solicitors. Again, she's buried in the churchyard at St Wilfrid's in Standish. On the 1891 census, the family are living at a house called Green Hill on Wigan Lane. And to guess, this is the St Clement's Road area. Other than dates and family details, we knew nothing about Helen, and Richard passed on this. There's a family story that Helen was engaged before she died to marry Cyril Kirkpatrick, an engineer who was later knighted. He became an assistant engineer on the London and North Western Railway, and we wonder if he spent time working in Wigan. Maybe that's how they met. There's a plaque in the church that caught my eye, remembering the White family. It's erected by a son in memory of his dad, mum and sister. Mary Hutchins White, her husband James and their daughter Florence. It's erected by their son, Dr. R. Prosser White. The Whites are a well-established family in Wigan. James White, the father, was a surgeon in Wigan for 50 years. In 1861, 71 and 81, their family are living at 22 King Street, salubrious mansion. The family are living at 139 Wigan Lane. From the photo, it looks like this is the house on the corner of Wigan Lane and New Lodge, and the house is still there. Shall I carry on?
What did it say?
Sorry, technical hitch.
Oh, it's recording. It's still all right.
We got caught.
Oh, right. Carry on, you're all right.
Okay. Robert Prosser White, born in Wigan, 1855 to 1939, oh dear. Robert, who erected the plaque, became an eminent doctor specialising in diseases of the skin. Robert's sister, mum and dad died within 5 years of each other. His mum and sister also have windows dedicated to him. When he was 55, he married Clarice, aged 35, who came from Jersey, and they had 2 sons, and Robert died in 1934. Robert and Clarice's oldest son, James Hellier, died during the D-Day landings. From his obituary, by the death of Mr. R. Prosser White, Wigan has lost one of her most distinguished sons, and the medical profession, an outstanding personality. He founded the skin department and gave the first X-ray apparatus to the infirmary. He was much interested in the mining and technical college and founded a French travelling scholarship whereby students could spend 3 months in France to study their special branch. The idea of the preservation of records of Wigan led him to commission young artists to paint and make drawings of the old buildings in the town. These are collected in the public library. Where on earth are those pictures now? A final window to look at. 2 names on it, Esther Cook and Esther Lister. The Wigan Observer tells us that. The window in memory of Esther Cook and Esther Lister, the 2 nurses who died in the infirmary of typhoid at the beginning of the year, has been placed in the church. The article tells us nothing about the 2 women and their sad deaths. Just recently I came across this report from the Observer. It is entitled, The Royal Albert Edward Infirmary, an encouraging report. The report starts by listing all the members of the board, male of course, those who were present and who sent their apologies, including Mr. Appleton, who we saw earlier, and Lord Crawford. It then goes on. With much regret, The board records for the first time in the 22 years during which the hospital has been in existence the death of 2 members of its nursing staff who contracted typhoid fever from a patient and unfortunately lost their lives in the discharge of their duty. The board have forwarded to the relatives of the nurses an expression of their sympathy, and that's all 2 women get, not even their names. Without pause for breath, the report continues with thanks to the friends who have put on concerts and provided a Christmas tree for the day room.
So moving on, St Mary's Inns. Why are we doing St Mary's Inns? Simply because it isn't there anymore. It was demolished and there's a risk it will be forgotten if it's not recorded. Opened in 1887, it was demolished about 1878, mainly because of mining substance. It's interesting to look at the mine of 1894, just a few years before the church opened. For a little while, the red brick must have been clean and shiny and have stood out. But looking at what was happening around the church, it must have soon have got a covering of mucky grime and soot. Out to the west as now, were the 2 cemeteries, Ince and Wigan Borough. Immediately to the west of the church, though, was the busy Welling Loop line, train line, which meant heavy goods trains could avoid going through Wigan Station, and it also served the many mines in the immediate area. Springs Branch Railway Depot lay to the south. To the north was Wigan Wagon Works, where coal wagons were made and repaired. It must have been noisy, dirty, and in another way quite amazing. The church was very impressive, as so many photographs say. This is just very quickly the same firm designed all these churches in Wigan. Sharp, Paley and Austin, they designed 10 churches in Wigan, a third of the total. Here they are, these 2, St Mary's Inns and St Matthew's Highfield, are generally thought, because Austin just joined the company, they're often thought to be the finest ones, but that firm, it's a Lancaster firm, Sharp, Paley and Austin, dominate church building in this area.
2 men paid for St Mary's Inns, John Pearson and Thomas Knowles. We're going to look at Thomas Knowles and his family. There's a lot of information about him. He was Mayor and MP for Wigan. He was born in Ince in 1824 and at the age of 9 went to work in the mine, but had ambition to not just manage a mine, but to own one too. And he did just that and more. Thomas had interest in ironworks in Ince and the Dam Forge in Warrington. In 1854, he got into partnership with John Pearson to form Pearson Knowles. Apart from his interest in coal and iron, he owned Sovereign Mill in Wigan, a coal mill, and a model farm in Cheshire, just like you do. He leased an extensive sheep farm in Scotland and held directorships of railway and banking companies. I've been trying to think of a modern equivalent. He was married twice, having children with his first wife, his son John, who died at the age of 35, and the 3 girls, Martha, Elizabeth and Mary Ellen. Sisters Martha and Mary Ellen married 2 brothers, Thomas and Edward Fielden and Todmorden, both Conservative MPs. Elizabeth married John Harwood Banner, a baronet who actually had a job as an accountant and also became an MP. The family were very well known in Wigan, as you can see from the press coverage of their lives. The girls' wedding, are covered extensively in the Wigan Observer, even though none of them were married in Wigan. I suppose the Observer must have needed copy, but the comparison with Esther Cook and Esther Liston, the 2 nurses who died at the infirmary, is extraordinary. Mary Ellen, whose wedding was in 1884 in Windsor, was no less than 9 lines about her dress and those of the bridesmaids. Even the funerals are covered in great detail, Mary Ellen again. The people of Ince have lost a true friend, as she was always ready and willing to assist in any effort that would lead to their benefit. And there are 10 lines of names who sent floral displays. Thomas Knowles, in keeping with his status, had moved house several times. He had lived at Old Ince Hall, in a house called the Platts in Ince, and eventually moved to Darnhall Hall in Cheshire, where he died in 1865. But he's buried in Ince. His will is something else. This is a press report from the Edinburgh Evening News. I'm going to read it in reverse order for dramatic effect. The executors are directed, if it has not done so in his lifetime, to pay the donation he has promised, £5,000, free of legacy duty, towards the building and endowment of St Mary's Church in Ince in Makerfield. Very generous, you think, Thomas? That's a lot of money, thank you. And then it goes on. The will has been proved. The value of the personal estate in the United Kingdom amounting to upwards of £194,000. Fascinating details to follow. The testator gives to his son John all his wines, gentlemen's jewellery, horses, carriages, live and dead stock at Darnell Hall, and all the furniture and effects at his shooting box in Scotland. To his 3 daughters, all his latest jewellery. To his daughter, Mrs. Martha Field, with £1,000 in addition to £25,000 settled on her at her marriage. Upon trust for each of his daughters, Mrs. Elizabeth Barrow, Mrs. Mary Ellen Knowles, certain shares and £15,000. The furniture, plate, pictures, sculpture, books and effects at Darnell Hall are all left upon trust, so as to be enjoyed by the tenant for the rest of it, for the life of the estate.
So just so you know where we are, we're going to talk fairly quickly about 3 more churches, and then it'll be time for a break. But we're doing really well. Hope you're enjoying it. St Nathaniel's Flatbridge. We chose to rechurch this church early on for the simple reason it's where our mum and dad were married in 1955, where Dad's family had lived since the 1930s. We did not realise that we'd struck gold. St Nat's has kept a complete set of its parish magazines, a complete set, now deposited safely in the archives so that everyone can look at them. You can see St Nat's there, red brick. That's the foundation stone, laid by John Carlton Eckersley in the presence of James Francis, our favourite Bishop Chavas of Liverpool. This, I probably shouldn't tell you this is just in the safe. There's similar ones in other churches in Wigan, but this is a pristine architect's drawing. All these things are hidden away. But in Flatbridge, there was another chapter in the story before the present lofty church, the first landmark we've always looked out for from the church from London, was built, because they had an iron church, a tin tabernacle. Iron churches were quite common in Wigan at the end of the 1800s. We know there were ones at Highfield and New Springs in Giglow. They were manufactured in Liverpool, London and Manchester and exported all over the world. Thanks to Mr. Greenaway, who wrote, handwritten, the history of the church in the 1970s, which again we found in the safe, we have a considerable amount of information about the Iron Church in Flatbridge. It was very much more than a tin hut. Mr. Greenaway tells us that the Iron Church was built by James Lee of Moss Side in Manchester. He says it was well ventilated. The top parts of all windows open for ventilation. It is well lit by gas lamps and heated by means of hot water pipes connected to a boiler in a cellar onto the vestry on the south side of the church. We are told that although the iron might have looked somewhat cold and bare from the outside, the interior is lined with stained, not varnished timber, ensuring a warm, welcoming appearance. And thanks to Vince, who's here tonight, we have this remarkable photograph of that family. We don't know who they were outside the Iron Church at New Spring. And I think that just speaks volumes. I went to an Iron Church, which is still in use the other day just near Stansted Airport. It's probably smaller than the Wigan ones, but not dissimilar. It really is a lovely atmospheric place. But with these iron churches, you do wonder how people felt when they left their iron churches, where they'd been to christenings, weddings and funerals, when they went there for the last time to go into the smart, big, magnificent new church. The new church must have seemed very grand and maybe a little intimidating. Perhaps they felt like loyal football or rugby supporters feel when they leave an old familiar, maybe slightly run-down stadium for a brand new modern one. Fantastic. This is probably Giglow. It looks as if the church actually might have been in the process of being moved, because these churches moved. Once you got a fancy new church, it went somewhere else. It was recycled. So it looks there. And anybody who knows Giglow Methodist, that's what we believe used to be on the site of Giglow Methodist. As I said, the foundation for the new stone was laid by John Carlton Eckersley in 1904. And the Eckersleys And in Lomax, you can see on the Society's website the story of the Eckersleys. Very involved in church building. Father Nathaniel paid for the incredible St. James's Post stock. It's still widely held he did so by keeping the mill workers' wages low. We won't dream to comment further. But it's his son, John Carton, who helps to finance St. Nat's. Much of the money for St. Nathaniel's, and keep getting told off, as at St. Andrew's and St. Michael's, was raised by the people themselves. In Blackbridge, a subscription scheme was launched to build their church. Your guess is as good as ours as to how it worked. This is what it said in the parish magazine. I can still cope with the pound, shillings and pence, but how that worked, we have no idea. And so the church was built, and thanks to those carefully, lovingly looked after parish magazines, thank you, Eileen Horton, we have the whole story.
In 1923, a significant event in the life of the parish of St Nathaniel's took place with the arrival of Reverend Arthur Dean. He stayed at St Nat's until his death in 1956, a total of 34 years. To our dad, who was in the choir at St Nat's for most of those years, Reverend Dean was a hero, a proper parson, Dad used to say. He was a short man and wore old-fashioned round and H specs. That's Dean, not my dad. He walked with a stick and wore a type of motorboard. He was born with a disability referred to at the time as clubfoot, but nothing seems to have stopped him in his parish rounds. He is seen smiling in photographs at the heart of parish events, for example, the Mothers' Union annual party. You get the impression he was very happy and content to be vicar at St Nat's. He wrote the parish hymn. I'm not going to sing it. People also remember Reverend Dean's sad and sudden death. The walking day in 1956 went ahead as usual. We've read that the vicar had been advised to lead the procession using a wheelchair, but Reverend Dean decided he would walk, and walk he did. The procession went ahead. Reverend Dean collapsed just after the last child had gone into church for the service. He was taken to a house across the road, but had already died. The event is still spoken of today in hushed tones. Reverend Dean's ashes are buried near the altar in St Nat's. It's a nice field to remember Reverend Dean, as we said, meant so much to our dad and to the people of Blackbridge.
Just quickly, 2 more churches, if that's all right with everybody.
Yeah.
If I can find them. Hey, different, older. Early 1930s, simpler, from a different age. Like hundreds of other churches at the time, it was paid for by the church commissioners, in effect by the government. They were known as Waterloo churches. There are 2 churches like this in Wigan, Hay and St John's Pemberton, both designed by Whitman and Hutchinson, who designed similar churches all over the northwest. Books about these churches refer you to the Church Commissioner's minute books to find out more. Curious! Yours truly followed a reference to the minute books up and found they were kept in Lambeth Palace Library, the Archbishop of Canterbury's London had. I emailed, explained, and after showing my ID went in feeling slightly unsure. Very posh, but very nice, helpful people. I'm here to research the churches in Wigan. Dating from the 1830s, the minutes are all handwritten and bound in big books that cover Waterloo churches all over the country. Hay remains a mystery. Pages and pages about it in the minute books. It was surreal, sitting there at Lambeth Palace Library, reading pages and pages about Pemberton and Hay. I think possibly I'm one of the few people who've actually ever looked at them. It's quite magical. Pages and pages about Hay in the minute books. At the same time, Hay Hall was being rebuilt by the 24th, and the Earl of Crawford gave the land and provided the stone for Hay Church. But the commissioners, from what we could see, paid for the church building. Endless arguments all politely took place between the 2 sets of solicitors. The Earl gave the land, but the commission wanted to see the actual paperwork proving he owned it. At one point, the Earl's solicitor apologised for his late reply, explaining that the Earl had been indisposed, having fallen off the scaffolding put up to build the new hall. And the Crawford pew, the Earl's special seat in the parish church. The Earl wanted his pew to be transferred to the new church at Hay. The significance and importance, was it just prestige, of this we don't yet fully understand, but negotiations shown in the minutes, again through the two solicitors, were long and complicated. We think another private act at Parliament might eventually be required before he got his way. The 24th Earl was also eager to have suitable accommodation for his family in the church and somewhere special for the servants to sit.
Lovely servants. We wandered round the graveyard of St David's and noticed the grave of several servants. Sarah Joyce, born 1815 in Congleton and died on the 14th of September 1877. In 1851, Sarah is living at Hay Hall and is listed as a nurse. The new hall had recently been completed, no doubt with special accommodation for the children and the staff who looked after them. Sarah took care of 6 girls and 1 boy, children of the 25th Earl. There was only the 1 boy, and no spare, James Ludovic, who compiles a famous library. No pressure, Sarah. And the name Ludovic occurred to me the other day, Ludovic Terrace, off Wigan Lane. Sarah died in 1877 at a very grand address, 9 Grosvenor Square in London. She was with the Earl and the Countess staying in Mayfair. This address is mentioned in the Crawford Archive. Let's assume she'd been staying with the family for the summer season in London, presumably still working. She was brought back to be buried at Hay. This is what the grave says. In memory of Mrs. Sarah Joyce, she was a faithful and attached servant of the Earl and Countess of Crawford, and lived with them during 30 years, first as head nurse to all the children, and subsequently as housekeeper. This stone is erected as a memorial of the love and respect of her master and mistress. Last week in the reference library, we came across the huge new book about the Crawford family, a coffee table special at £60. Sarah is mentioned in a description of the servants. The comely flock of women servants, captained by Mrs. Joyce, our beloved Nana, who became a housekeeper. And then we have William Scott, born in 1805, died in 1877, born in Scotland. 45 years in the service of the Hay family. The cross is erected by Margaret, Countess of Crawford, as a memorial for the respect and esteem of his master and friend, Alex, Earl of Crawford. And because he's a man, he gets a little mention in the Observer. Mr. Scott, when 26 years of age, entered in 1830 the service of the Crawford and Balcarres family in the capacity of a joiner. But by his attention to business, he was in time promoted to a more responsible position. Latterly, he collected the cottage rents and superintended the masons, joiners and bricklayers on the estate. Mrs. Scott married one of the domestic servants from Hay Hall, and until her death a few years ago, Mrs. Scott managed Lord Crawford's dairy, and indeed, William and Elizabeth were living at the dairy house in Copper's Lane in the 1851 census.
And just to finish off, St Anne's Beech Hill. As Beech Hill estate grew, it was decided that some sort of church was needed. In Hay Church, there is surely the most moving tribute of any church in Wigan, which contains the memorials to 4 brothers all killed in the First World War. They were the sons of the Reverend Charles James, the Vicar of Hay, and we can only begin to imagine what he went through and how difficult it must have been for him to carry out his duties as vicar, which must have included giving support to relatives of other people who lost family members in the war. He wasn't the only vicar in this position. We mean what we say. The little area of the baptism where those 4 lads are commemorated must be one of the most moving places in Wigan, I think. St Anne's, finally. As Beech Hill Estate grew, it was decided that some sort of church was needed there, so a mission church under the supervision of St Andrews was built. The mission church opened in 1831, and of course the original building is still there in use as a parish hall, and soon developed to build a new church, but the war intervened. It was in 1951 that things really got going. And this story is told in 2 years' worth of parish magazines kept in the reference library. You got a wet Wednesday afternoon anytime, get them. In April 1951, the magazine announced a new fundraising scheme to sell bricks for the new church. Much money was needed. It was a real long-term commitment for the people of the parish and surely for the vicar. And the church wardens, and for him and the church wardens, there must have been some tense moments. But it wasn't just down to the people of Beach Hill. The vicar wrote that a good deal of the money, we don't know the exact figure, for the new church was to come from the War Damage Commission. He explained that St Anne's was to be built to take the place of a church in Liverpool, which had been destroyed by enemy action in the war. That church will not be replaced, as there's no longer a need for a church in that district anymore. And presumably money was obtained for the sale of the site of the church in Liverpool, and that money went towards the building of St Anne's in Beach Hill. Fundraising, though, was still needed. We are told that bricks were now being sold in 5-shilling books. Each book contained 10 bricks. What, we ask, were the bricks? The brick scheme was perhaps a bit too confusing. By the following year, gift boxes seemed to have been prepared. As the building work progressed, the vicar wrote, "You may feel building work is going along rather slowly. There's been some difficulty in obtaining slightly smaller bricks in the right sizes and quantities." A month later, he wrote, "I understand that very soon the work will begin on the large stone window which will face onto Beach Hill Avenue. And there that wonderful window is, like a flat iron." The photograph to the left is something very rare. It's a photograph of a church in Wigan actually being built. So that's for a little photograph album in St Anne's, and that shows, you could just make out the metal frame. If you look carefully, you just see the church being built. Then, with the church nearing completion, the date for the consecration was set, the 21st of November 1953, the consecration, the formal opening by the bishop. Nothing, though, is ever straightforward, is it? More people wanted to attend the service than the new church could hold. The vicar wrote, "Those that have been coming most regularly to church will be in the new church for the consecration, and others will be in the church hall and the youth club. The most important thing is that there should at all costs be no squabbling about it." Sounding flustered, the vicar goes on, "Almost 430 people sent in their names asking for seats at the service. That seems to be more than the new church could hold. The church has allocated seats in the new church, while the other 50 have been allocated in the overflow service in the church hall." It uses capital letters. "Ticket holders must be in their places by 7:40. No seats will be kept after this time. Those in the chapel will only see part of the service, but we will be able to hear everything." Well, the church duly opened and things settled down. Reporter from the Wigan Observer visited the church for the first time in 1956. "I promptly lost my heart to it," he wrote. "The unorthodox, flat, iron west windows, the bold use of rustic brick, above all, the lightness of the place. Lift of the spirit surely goes with attendance here. It's well worth the pilgrimage by those who live in other parts of the town." 67 years later, having visited it, we can wholeheartedly agree.
Change of focus in this half year, please. We've left the hard history behind and we're on to stories from church magazines. But first of all, I discovered the Wigan Infirmary donor boards last year. Couldn't believe I didn't know about them. So if you want to see most of the people we've talked about together in one place, next time you're lucky enough to get an appointment at the infirmary, spend a bit longer in the main entrance. And here is the list of donors. Nearly everyone we've mentioned is there, and the amount of their donation, if you're really nosy. Its location is in the most inconvenient place. Please beware of the automatic doors. But you can see, we've got top left, Robert Prosser White, Charles Appleton, at the bottom, and over here, the whole host of the characters. We've got the Eccles Liz, Miss Pearson and Knowles and various other colleagues and individuals. But they're really interesting when you when you go and look at them. So we're just going to do a couple of slides about different Wigan churches. The first one is the Queen's Hall, built in 1908. I remember, a lot of people in the room do, high school speech days here, terribly formal occasions in what seemed to be a very formal building. So we can see it in the picture just how grand it was. Look at the balcony and look at the organ.
And of course, Wigan is full of chapels. There's even a Welsh chapel, now a carpet shop in Ashton. The Christian Meeting House is next to the reference library, and the Gyra Chapel story is on the Society webhouse. Roman Catholic churches are easy to research. They have their own website, Taking Stock, which tells their story and explains the features of every Roman Catholic church in the country. There are, of course, the two churches on Wigan Lane, St Odward's in Ashton. Now, I especially like this one.
Sorry.
St Jude's Roman Catholic Church, Worsley Mains, 1965, Grade 2 listed. If you can get in, it's worth going in just to see that fantastic glass.
The parish magazines are an endless, rich source of stories of parish life. We love them, and we're going to share some of our favourites with you. Many describe happy occasions and the sharing of simple pleasures. Some events are just unbelievably sad, because we remember tragedy in Wigan's past, played out as it was in the town's churches. All Saints Hindley, that little church founded in 1641, rebuilt in 1767. Its history, written by John Lowe in 1991, contains this terribly sad account, the one we want to share with you. The Church of All Saints had its high days on occasions, such as Wake Sundays and other major festivals. It also had its low days, when it focused the sadness and distress of the whole village on itself. Such a day was the Monday after Advent in 1868. There had been an explosion at Springs Colliery in the Green on the preceding Thursday, in which over 60 people were killed. 42 of them were buried at All Saints. It had been planned to hold the funerals on a staggered basis between 10 and 4 o'clock, but the inquest had run late, and the first hearse did not arrive until 2:45. A contemporary account, Mr. Lowe says, brings out all the pathos and sadness of the occasion. It was a very cold day, chilly, with a foggy atmosphere and heavy rain. The paths of the churchyard were lined by spectators, and they spread over the rest of the ground. Hearse followed hearse, and soon after 3 o'clock, some 15 to 20 bodies had arrived at the church gates, each with its group of pitiful and saturated mourners. There they were met by the Vicar of All Saints, the Reverend Charles Newbold, his curate, the Reverend Gillen, and the Vicar of the chapel at Pennington Green, Reverend Piggott. The coffins were taken into the church until they completely surrounded the interior. The organist, meanwhile, played the solemn notes of the Dead March from Soul. The Vicar of All Saints, Reverend Newbold, was so overcome by the sadness of the occasion that he could not take part in the service, which was read by the curate and Reverend Piggott. Then the bodies were carried outside, buried in graves in every corner of the churchyard. A second group of funerals, with their attendant mourners, followed in similar fashion, and it was dark before the service for them ended. And a third group, the bodies being turned by the light of lanterns, which added to the eeriness. The bell tolled through the afternoon and evening. It was 7 o'clock before the last body was interred, and one grave had to be hastily redug after collapsing in the wet conditions. Inside, the whole body of the church was reserved for families, and the galleries for other mourners. 42 in all were buried in Hindley churchyard, of which 17 were aged between 11 and 16. There were several cases of father and son being buried together, and there were two sets of brothers, aged 15 and 13, and 15 and 12 respectively. The sadness of the occasion so affected Reverend Newbold that he was ill, unable to minister for some months afterwards, and the heavy pastoral visits and practical help necessitated by the disaster all fell upon his curate, the Reverend Gillan. Reverend Gillan, like most curates in those days, didn't stay at All Saints for long, but when he left, the following tribute was paid to him. Reverend Gillan came to All Saints just before the Springs disaster, and his exertions and kindness at that time in visiting the widows and fatherless were beyond all praise. Reverend Gillan, another unsung hero, like Hay and the Reverend James, the burden on the people in charge of the churches must at times have been unbearable. No wonder some simply found the task too great, and in such a close community, everyone must have known everyone else, the grief shared by all.
Enough, let's have some fun. St Nathaniel's again. The 1903 Parish Magazine tells us about an incredible choir outing which had taken place on the 17th of June, and we think it's worth quoting. 1903. All managed to catch the 6:45 train from Blackbridge and were in good time for the train from Wigan. On arrival at Bakewell, a splendid breakfast was served and speedily removed. I think they meant eaten. Immediately afterwards, we set out by coach to Haddon Hall, a most interesting old place. Here the party was photographed, but it is to be feared that we proved too much for the camera. The flashing ring of one member of the party was probably much to answer for in this respect. Then up to Chatsworth, where we became perfectly bewildered by the magnificence of our surroundings, and by the flood of information so freely offered by our worthy guides. Information which afforded much merriment and was specially adapted for burlesque. What did they mean? On to Matlock by coach, some day. Here we indulge in the present row, undertaken with some trepidation by many, refused entirely by some. The race resulted in a win for the church warden's boat, comfortably one might have said, but for the presence of some telltale blisters. On reaching the shore of Matlock, we were received with much delight by the land party, and now for dinner, anxiously awaited and thoroughly appreciated. After dinner, lunch of course, the choir split up, some exploring the surrounding hills, others the caverns, the rest the shops. Was there ever such a merry party on the homeward journey? One pillar of the church, whose boat won on the river, now excelled himself and others in merrymaking. Genial churchwarden Neville. But towards the end of the journey, the choir delighted us by all singing the choruses from the service of song. A happy day, free from accident, where we have many such. We love this account and hope you do too. Yes, church-going in Wigan in the 1900s was no doubt at time a devout, serious business, but there's so much more to it than that. You can just imagine people getting into giggles in Chatsworth at the guides. Picture the noisy chaos on the River Derwent and almost hear Mr. Neville belting out a well-known humorous music song to all the passengers in a packed evening train. We don't know how this outing was funded. Did they pay for themselves? Did the Ecclesleys cough up? But at least some people seem to have had a bit of fun, a bit of money to spare, and enjoyed exploring the world beyond Blackbridge and Wigan with their friends.
Now at St Matthew's Highfield in 1952. The Garden Fete and Rose Queen ceremony on the 14th of June 1952 was a washout, sounds familiar, but still raised £150. The Have Another Go spirit was, however, popping up all over the place, and the second summer effort took place on August the 30th on the recreation ground at 3 p.m. Gates opened at 2 p.m, and the event opened with Summer Follies, a concert by Royal Air Force Productions, which included Betty Lee's the Band by Betty Morley, The Ministry of Twerps by the Twerps, and Holiday Tulip Time by Betty, Tommy the Girls. After the interval, Café Continental by the whole company, The Lad of the Party by Henry Morley, and the grand finale, Rose of England by the full company, of course. Staging on the back of a lorry, microphone, we don't know. Refreshments served between 5 and 6 p.m. were at moderate charges. Then at 6 p.m. approximately, 3 sports matches were played in a bizarre parish tournament. First, rounders, non-parishioners versus parishioners. Next, cricket, Mr. R. Thomas's team versus Mr. A. Darwish's team. Then at 7 o'clock approximately, a round football match for Garden Fay Cup between the winners of rounders and versus the winner of cricket, culminating at 7:45 with the presentation of the cup. The team lists are set out in the parish magazine. Local people with familiar names: Mrs. Ashton, Miss Heaton, Mr. Gaskell, Nick's teams. And here we have the rules of these rather strange events. Rules of comic rounders match. Batting normal, all players bat normal, but walking between bases. Headgear to be worn by all players, including umpires. What else does that mean? Rules of comic football. Gents' headgear to be raised on kicking ball. Walking and running, large water be supplied by Mr. W. Hook. Referee, Mr. Harry Brickhouse, celebrated with Wembley referee. NB, if wet, the concert of slideshows and the stalls will be in the schools. Sadly, the success or otherwise of the second summer effort was not mentioned in subsequent magazines, and by October, attention was very much focused on the Christmas fair.
St Anne's again. See, this is what happens if you put your magazines in the archives. St Anne's again, 1952. The young mothers went to a rally in London by coach, leaving the Market Square at 8:30. The rally was in Methodist Central Hall in Westminster, and the women had glamorous accommodation in the air raid shelter in Clapham, 190 steps down. The next day, after Holy Communion in Westminster Abbey, the rally reached its climax when Princess Elizabeth died.
Right.
Princess Elizabeth arrived. Molly Dickinson. Molly Dickinson. It's been a long day. The rally reached its climax when Princess Elizabeth arrived. Molly Dickinson, who wrote the report for the magazine, said that photos in the press just didn't do her justice. She's very lovely. Another night in the air raid shelter and up early for home, having had an experience they will never forget. And we just love this one. So Michael Swinley, Hoover demonstration to the Young Wives Group, 1961. They're all there, these gents are all there. October the 3rd was the Hoover demonstration, and we were delighted to welcome members of the Mothers' Union to our meeting. This demonstration was very interesting, and many questions about Hoover appliances were fired at Mrs. Langton, the Hoover representative. Then this bit's really weird. These questions she answered very satisfactorily, even to informing us that the rubber belt on their vacuum cleaners was supposed to last only 6 months.
This one's about back to St Anne's Beach Hill in 1952. The building of the new church had started, and there must have been a real air of optimism. Well, I think that's this was coming up with what we now call persuasive writing. That to do again. Here is the announcement you've been waiting for. Details of our 4th annual dinner dance to be held on November the 14th, 1952 at the Bath Assembly Hall. Plans are going forward to make this event even bigger and better than before. But from your point of view, the important thing is to make sure of your ticket. If you haven't got one by the end of the month, October, then you'll have to be getting a move on. We shouldn't like you to be disappointed, but we cannot guarantee places to within a few days of the event. So book early. Now for details. The function includes supper, whist and dancing. Supper is served at 7:15 and dancing and whist follow 8:15. The inclusive ticket costs 10 and 6. But for dancing and whist only, including light refreshments later in the evening, the tickets are 6 shillings. Catering is by Booth West Horn, and the enticing menu, in addition to a soup and a sweet, includes roast lamb or beef, no vegan option in those days, and boiled potatoes and other vegetables, and concludes with cheese and biscuits and coffee. Still undecided. There is a saying, he who hesitates is lost. In this case, he would have lost his supper. So if you haven't got the extra 4 and 6 handy, go and borrow it or something. There will be some valuable prizes for winners at the whist drive, and plenty of prizes for spots and novelty dancers. I've forgotten all about spot prizes. Completely forgotten about them. During the interval, there is to be a dancing display by pupils of the Moss School of Dancing, prepared by Miss Hilton Moss, which we know from previous experience is very attractive. Now, how are we going to get there and back? It's a long way from Beach Hill to the Baths. We've even thought of that one, and arrangements have been made for saloon coaches to leave the church at 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. The coaches will pick up passengers en route, provided prior arrangement is made with Mr. Green. Well, there you have the details. We hope we've whetted your appetite, but if not, take our word for it. It will be a grand do, which you should not miss. So don't forget those tickets, obtainable from members of the church council, leaders of organisations, or inevitably at Mr. Green's shop. Phew. The level of organisations for from this event is frightening, but not an Excel spreadsheet in sight. Heavy reliance on cash, receipt books, and over-the-counter banking. Handwritten lists, 2 sorts of tickets, lists of pick-up points. Mind-boggling. So next time you drive past St Anne's, picture those happy merrymakers getting off the coaches after what must have been a simply lovely time at the Baths Hall. All no selfies, no Insta, just laying off on his fun.
And you know what's coming now, just to end? You know what it's going to be, I hope. Go to Wigan World. What photos do you think crop up the most? It's Walking Day. Anyone who was here in Wigan when they took place remembers them clearly. The parish magazine says Walking Day at St Andrews usually takes place on the first Sunday in June. The children always look most delightful on this occasion. When did these fondly remembered events start? When was the first Walking Day? We don't know, but this is interesting. St Nathaniel's Blackbridge in 1903 from the parish magazine. This is what the vicar wrote. The field day was to be on the 8th of July. The event started with a procession from the church to the field. Perhaps here we have the first mention of what became walking days. The vicar writes, a word as to our field day. The original idea of procession is a religious one. It is a public procession to demonstrate that we are Christians. In the early days, the Christians used to parade through heathen towns singing litanies and hymns, and our processions are but a relic of those days. For this reason, I hope all adult members will join the children to let the world see that the followers of Christ are many and not ashamed. I cordially invite you all to meet at the schools at 1:30. A later magazine tells us that the day was blessed with fair weather. Assembling outside the church, a large procession wended its way through the village, headed by the Par Temperance Prize Band. In regard to numbers and prettiness, the procession was one of the best we have ever had. Its appearance evoked many expressions of adulation. The quick, bright music of the band was also excellent and added to the pleasure of the walkers and watchers alike. After the procession, we adjourned to Pollett's Field, where tea, sandwiches and cakes were provided for the children, who also received toys. Races and sports were held for the children and were much enjoyed. It will be interesting to find out when the term walking day is first used. More magazine searching ahead. Deep joy.
In the early 1960s, a correspondent from the Church Times, the Church of England's weekly newspaper, came specially to watch St Andrew's Walking Day. So someone, presumably from outside Wigan, had been sent to the town to report on Wigan Walking Day. It was recognised that they were worth seeing, something special. The Church Times report reads, Walking days are an outstanding feature of church life in Wigan. Each parish walks on a different Sunday. The children in their new walking day dresses and suits proudly hold the streamers attached to the banners. The brownies, Girl Guides, Cubs and Boy Scouts try to march in step in their smart uniforms and polished shoes carrying their flags. Young ladies and mothers with splendidly new hats follow on, while the men staunchly bring up the rear. Had 3 brass bands, playing marching airs, got the server carrying the cross, the choir and the vicar at the front, the 2 marshals to guide, and policemen to hold up the traffic, and you have some idea of the Wigan Walk. A friend who went to St John's Pemberton remembers people dragging chairs onto the pavements to watch, how the band music reverberated and echoed around the narrow streets lined with terraced houses, and how the procession, having gone up Queen Street, turned left into Bradshaw Street and left again into Worrell Road. The 2 bands at either end of the procession could be heard playing different tunes at the same time through the cross streets. It's in a magazine from another parish, we won't say which one, looking back on a successful walk. Once again, a spirit of goodwill was present, and there was very little of the petty bickering which has sometimes tended to spoil walking days in previous years.
We've talked to people who say that the only time there were any arguments in the parish was when the decision needed to be made about the colour scheme for the children's clothes on each banner. One in blue, another green, but which shade? Agreement, perhaps through gritted teeth, was somehow reached and pounds went to Hearts in Market Street, or the Flax Mill in Rowbottom Square, to buy yards of the chosen material, and presumably the children were measured, and the sewers, like Winifred who did for St George's, sewed until the task was completed, and probably only the evening before the big day dawned. And it wasn't just the children who were specially kitted out. The church choir had their surplices specially washed and ironed for the occasion. The marshals. We have the names at St Anne's Beach Hill for their walking day. Mr Tom Green was to be the senior marshal. Mr W Melling, the banner marshal. If anyone here remembers either gentleman, we apologise, but we can't help but think of a stout, portly Second World War veteran, Captain Mannering, which somehow springs to mind.
The banners leading off. We were so pleased to meet 4 ladies at St Stephen's Welling. Leading off, they explained, was a much sought after role. For anyone not familiar with the practical details of banners at walking days, they were huge to us, especially as children. They appeared in church a week before walking day from some secret location, where they'd been carefully rolled up after the previous year's walking day. They needed to be, good with a word, aired and checked over. They were carried on 2 long poles, men carrying the poles in special made pouches. From memory, the men used to swap over during the walk, because especially if it was windy, Canal Bridge and New Springs, carrying them was hard work. 4 ropes were attached to the top, and strong children or adults held those to add stability. The ribbons attached to the top were purely for decoration. The most sought after walking day position was that of children who held 2 ribbons at the front on either side. They led off. To lead off, you had to have, we've been told, the best attendance at church and Sunday school. If there was a tie, names were drawn out of a hat. Imagine the rows and the tears. Parents would do almost anything to get their child on a banner. Can you just squeeze them on? Sorry. So me. Okay, sorry. See why I hesitated. Looking your best was important, not just for children. Just look at our mum and her friends on this slide. Someone commented that in some ways it was just one big fashion show.
Walking Day culminated in an outdoor service. And we remember, as many other people do, a coal lorry being used as a platform so everybody could hear and see the vicar. Presumably there were no microphones. Everyone you talk to remembers the church's One Foundation being sung, accompanied by one of the often paid bands which stayed on for the purpose. The banners are amazing, are they not? Most churches have 2 or 3 large banners and a number of smaller ones. We are told that some of the St Andrew's banners were purchased at the end of the 19th century and have since been remade or repaired. One was designed by Watson Co, a very famous designer of church furnishings. Such was the enthusiasm for Walking Day that in 1961 a new banner was acquired, the third large banner. The front shows the Good Shepherd and the miracle of the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and the back shows the crucifixion. A lady at St John's, New Springs, went round the parish on a regular basis to collect sixpences from parishioners to add to the banner fund, to buy new and repair old banners. Where are these banners now? Now that most walking days no longer take place, some are on display. Go to St Stephen's Welly, St Nathaniel's Black Bridge and Holy Trinity Downall Green, and you can see them proudly displayed. Many more are rolled up, stored away. One church even has a hand-painted banner. What should happen to them? They are old and fragile works of art which deserve to be looked after properly. Maybe it's a job for the good people at the repair shop. Someone should do something about it. It's far too much to expect individual churches to find a solution. It's just too hard to get them down from where they're stored, let alone repair them. There was a photograph recently of a small banner chucked in a skip. We will not want that to happen.
You'll be pleased to hear about our next steps now. Having dealt with all that, we've got more plans. First of all, at least 4 weeks away from Wigan churches. Greek islands for me, New York for Will. We've visited more churches than we've had time to cover here, and there's still more to see. We're particularly keen to go to Bamfalong and Bickershaw and the churches in Hindley. It's much easier now because we know which questions to ask and what to look for. We're getting help from lots of people in Wigan, and word is getting around about what we are doing. There's no point in doing this unless we share it, so we're really pleased to have done this today. We've given talks at St Anne's Beach Hill and on Saturday at Holy Trinity Downall Green. We are planning to repeat this talk at St Michael's and invite any interested people. We visited the Deanery High School and hope to share what we found with younger people. We want to visit Weston Hall, the Bridgeland Home, and the archives at Liverpool Cathedral. Bishop Shabazz of Liverpool was everywhere in Wigan, and his papers are in Oxford College. We've been invited to look at the archive there. So that's it. Thank you very much for coming and listening, and to the Society for all its help and support. And we do hope that you've enjoyed coming tonight and finding out a little bit about who built Wigan's churches. Thank you.